Today we want to talk about OAuth. A lot of people confuse about what OAuth actually is. They think it is something like login flow or a security thing and no more. Let's figure it out. What is OAuth? First, it's not an IP or service. It is an open standard for authorization and anyone can implement it. Apps can use it to provide client app with secure delegated access. It works over HTTPC and authorized devices, apps, servers and applications with access tokens, rather than credentials. There are two versions of OAuth, OAuth 1.0 and OAuth 2.0. They are completely different and cannot be together. Nowadays, more useful OAuth 2.0. And when I say about OAuth, I say about 2.0. Why OAuth? OAuth was created as a response to direct authentication pattern. With this protocol, you don't need to send your password and username to the server. Now user sends only an APK ID and secret. Before OAuth, sites would prompt you to enter your username and password directly into a form, and they would log into your data as you. This is often called the password anti-pattern. The general workflow for an application using OAuth is as follows: getting authorization and access to protected resources. The result of authorization is an access token. Access token is a certain key, usually just a set of characters, the presentation of which is a path to protected resources. In the simplest way, they are accessed via HTTPC with an indication in the headers or as one of the parameters of the received access token. To create a better system for the web, federated identity was created for a single sign-on, SSO. SSO is an authentication scheme that allows a user to log in with a single ID and password to any of several related yet independent software systems. In this scenario, a cryptographically signed token is generated for the user and passed to the application to authenticate the user. The application trusts to identity provider. As long as the trust relationship works with a signed statement, everything is fine. The protocol describes several authorization options suitable for different situations. First, authorization for applications that have a server side. Second, authorization for fully client applications. Third, authorization by login and password. And as last, restore previous authorization. The main point: companies need to protect the REST APIs in a way that allows many devices to access them. In the old day, you had entered your username, password, directory, and the app would log in directly as you. This gave rise to the delegated authorization problem. How can I allow an app to access my data without necessarily giving it my password? It's an important question. First question that we want to figure is OAuth roles. OAuth defines 4 roles: resource owner, the user; client, the third-party application; resource server, the IP; and authorization server, often the same as the IP. First, it's resource owner, user. The resource owner is the user who authorizes an application to access their account. The application's access to the user's account is limited to the scope of the authorization granted. Second, it's resource authorization server IP. The resource server hosts the protected user accounts, and the authorization server verifies the identity of the user, then issues access token to the application. Client applications. The client is the application that wants to access the user's account. Before it may do so, it must be authorized by the user, and the authorization must be validated by the IP. Abstract protocol flow. Now that you have an idea of what the OAuth roles are, let's look at a diagram of how they generally interact with each other. First, the application requests authorization to access service resource from the user. Second, if the user authorized the requests, the application receives an authorization grant. Third, the application requests an access token from the authorization server IP by presenting authentication of its own identity and the authorization grant. 4. If the application identity is authenticated and the authorization grant is valid, the authorization server IP issues an access token to the application, and authorization is complete. The application requests the resource from the resource server IP and presents the access token for authentication. If the access token is valid, the resource server IP serves the resource to the application. Application registration. Before you start to use OAuth, you should register your app with the service in the developer or IP of the service's website. Write some information about your app, example application name, application website, redirect URI or callback URI. What is redirect URI? This is where the service will redirect the user after they authorize or join your application, and therefore the part of your application that will handle authorization codes or access token. And what is client ID and client secret? The client ID is a publicly exposed string that is used by the service IP to identify the application. The client secret is used to authenticate the identity of the application to the service IP. Let's start to figure authorization grant. OAuth 2 defines 4 grant types, each of which is useful in different cases. First, authorization code. Second, implicit. Third, resource owner password credentials, and the last, client credentials. Some use cases that we should know: web server apps, browser-based apps, username password access, application access, and mobile access. Authorization grant has his own use cases. For example, authorization code for apps running on a web server, browser-based, and mobile apps. Implicit for browser-based, resource owner password credentials for username password access, and client credentials for application access. First, grant type, it's authorization code. In the screen you can see the scheme, how it works. The authorization code grant type is the most commonly used because it's optimized for server-side applications where source code is not publicly exposed and client secret confidentiality can be mentioned. This is a redirection-based flow, which means that the application must be capable of interacting with the user agent and receiving IP authorization codes that are routed through the user agent. Let's see. Authorization code. Step 1. Authorization code link. First, the user is given an authorization code link that looks like the following. You can see. First part of the link is the IP authorization endpoint, and then client ID, the application's client ID, how the IP identify the application. Then redirect URI, it's where the service redirects the user agent after an authorization code is granted. Then response type code, specify that your application is requesting an authorization code grant. And the last scope read, specify that level of access that the application is requesting. Step 2. When the user clicks the link, they must first log into the service to authenticate their identity, unless they are already logged in. Then they will be prompted by the service to authorize or deny the application access to the account. Here is an example authorize application prompt. The service will ask you authorize or deny. Yeah, you see? Okay, next step, third, application receives authorization code. If the user clicks authorize application, the service redirect the user agent to the application redirect URI, which was specified during the client registration along with an authorization code. The redirect would like something like that. I think the application is droppedbook.com. Step 4. Application requests access token. The application requests an access token from the IP by passing the authorization code along with authentication details, including the client secret to the IP token endpoint. It will look something like that. It's example post request to DigitalOcean's token endpoint. And step 5, application receives access token. If the authorization is valid, the API will send a response containing the access token and optionally refresh token to the application. The entire response will look something like that. And now the application is authorized. Okay, next, grant time implicit. You can see scheme how it works. And the implicit grant type is used for mobile apps and web applications that run in a web browser, where client secret confidentiality is not guaranteed. The implicit grant type is also a redirection-based flow, but the access token is given to the user agent to forward to the application, so it may be exposed to the user and other application on the user's device. Also, the flow does not authenticate the identity of the application. The implicit grant flow basically works as follows. The user is asked to authorize the application, then the authorization server passes the access token back to the user agent, which passes it to the application. You can see in scheme on the screen. Grant type implicit. Step 1. Implicit authorization link. With the implicit grant type, the user is presented with an authorization link that requests a token from the IP. These links look like the authorization code link. Expect it requesting a token instead of a code. Step 2. User authorized application. When the user clicks the link, they must first log in the service to authenticate their identity. Then they will be prompted by the service to authorize or deny the application access to their account. Here is an example. Step 3. User agent receives access token with redirect URI. If the user click Authorize application, the servers redirect the user agent to the application redirect URI and includes URI fragment containing the access token. Step 4. User agent follows the redirect URI. The user agent follows the redirect URI but retains the access token. Step 5. Application sends access token extraction script. The application returns a web page that contains a script that can extract the access token from the full redirect URI that the user agent has returned. Step 6. Access token passing to application. The user agent executes the provided script and passes the extracted access token to the application, and now the application is authorized. Next, grant type, resource owner password credentials. This grant type should only be enabled on the authorization server if other flows are not available. Also, it should only be used if the application trusted the user. Will the resource owner password credentials grant type the user provide their service credentials, username and password directly to the application, which uses the credentials to obtain an access token from the service. Password credentials flow. After the user gives their credentials to the application will then request an access token from the authorization server. The post request might look something like this. If the user credentials check out, the authorization server returns an access token to the application. And now the application is authorized. Now a little bit about use cases. First use case is web server apps. Web apps are written in server-side language and run on server where the source code of the application is not available to the public. Link look like that. In the past I little bit say about scope. It's scope one or more scope areas, indicating which part of their user's account you wish to access. And state it's a random string generated by your application, which you will verify later. In this slide you can see what user see. It's authorization prompt, you should allow or retaining. Use cases single page apps or browser-based apps. Run entirely in the browser after loading the source code from a web page. You can see link, a little bit about this link, code challenge. The URL save, hash of the secret, and con challenge methods indicate which hashing method you used. About mobile apps. Like browser-based apps, mobile apps also cannot maintain the confidentiality of a client secret. You can see link, nothing special, nothing new, and other grant types. OAuth 2 also provides a password grant type which can be used to exchange username and password for an access token directly. You can see post request. In some cases, applications may need an access token to act on behalf or themselves rather than a user. And now you can see post for application access. Example access token usage. Once the application has an access token, It may use the token to access their user's account via the IP, limited to the scope of access until the token expires or it is revoked. You can see post curl, and in the end of presentation you can see reference and I read that I use. You can also read them and maybe understand better what I say. Thank you very much for listening. I hope that you understand what I say, and Happy New Year!